Robert Whittaker is quite possibly the clearest lock to be in the Hall of Fame of anybody who's not currently in the Hall of Fame. He'd have a really hard time ever convincing, oh, no, Whittaker, oh, come on, he's not going in. Oh, yeah, he's going in. Whittaker's almost a perfect fighter. If you look at his skills, he's almost a perfect fighter, not to mention he's had experience and success at two different weight classes. So Whittaker has now called out Sean Strickland. And you got to understand, knowing who's who or who should go where, even from a rankings perspective, is a wildly difficult thing to handicap accurately in our sport because we don't have a competitive architecture. We do not have a playoff system. I mean, you go get a straight line bracket, even for the guy that doesn't win or make it to the finals. There's a consolation. You come back, you know who's third, you know who's fifth. It's really hard in MMA. And sometimes you got to work things out of order. Like Robert Whittaker being a world champion who's now floating around a division. Well, Sean Strickland is a world champion who's also floating around a division. Let's say those two go and find each other. Like for historical purposes, that could be really helpful. That is one of those matches that a year from now, 3 years from now, 8 years from now, people that are fight fans sitting around a bar, sitting around a living room, will argue about who would have won if Sean Strickland had fought Robert Whittaker. Like that will be one of those matches that's debated. So if they could find each other, like that would be a really helpful thing. You're also eliminating somebody. And you know what? Interesting spot for Whittaker. I talk about a bracket. I talk a lot a straight line bracket. You can find out who number one is and number two. You know, they have the finals. You got a semifinals. You can have a third and a fourth. If you did a bracket and you actually followed a competitive architecture, like say what we just did with the NFL to get to the Super Bowl, if you did that and you redrew that bracket 3 or 4 different times, Robert Whittaker is more likely to win more brackets than anybody else. He just has a problem with one style, one guy, which is Adesanya. Well, how do you ever get that one back? Well, what would happen if Whittaker could beat the guy who beat that guy, which is what Sean Strickland would represent? I'm just talking about if you've got to rank this thing, if you've got to write it down and tell the story to your grandkids accurately, who goes where? It's a really hard thing to do in MMA. And that match I would love to see. I just don't predict for you that we're going to see it. I think that Robert Whittaker is a top guy any given day. But I think the star of Sean Strickland, and we will see how long this star can shine bright. But it's in a position where I wouldn't predict for you that a risk would be taken where one of them would be eliminated. So I just don't know that you're going to get the match. But I love that Whittaker called for the match. How do you like that? Contradicting myself, am I making it a little bit confusing? But when you look at Robert Whittaker, see, he's getting to the point in his career where as a fan, you've got to really value your Whittaker moments. And the one thing about Whittaker calling out Sean Strickland, Whittaker could have walked away from this sport 3 years ago, and we all would have understood. 3 years ago, people that were in the position of Whittaker and had achieved what he had achieved and gotten the money, the success, the opportunities would have had enough memories and they would have said goodbye. Plenty of guys with matching resumes to Whittaker's 3 years ago did say goodbye. We never called him back and we never said it was too early. We fully understood. So all those memories and all those fights since, not to mention absolute war that he goes through with Paulo Costa. I mean, that fight never got the buzz going into it or coming out of it that it truly deserved. But the fact that it was only 2 weeks ago and Robert Whittaker already wants to get back in there. Oh, by the way, he's already got an opponent in mind. Oh, by the way, he possibly called for the hardest opponent that he's yet to face. Is very interesting to me. Because there's always that room for Whittaker to say goodbye. I've done enough. I'm going out on time. I'm going to be one of the rare world champions in the history of the world who goes out on top. And that's a thought that you always have to have in your mind as a viewer like me, and Robert Whittaker has removed it from our minds. He's already called somebody out. He's not done. I mean, let's just start with that. He's not done. He's not even done trying to make a run. There's no reason you go after Sean Strickland unless you're trying to make a run. And you want to know what I wanted? I never get my way, but you want to know what I've wanted as a fan? I've wanted Whittaker to go to 205. I just like him there, and I'm just curious. Now, he spoke on this one time, and only one time, at least that I ever heard, he said those guys are too big. So we're not going to get that. In fact, there was even a discussion of changing weight classes, but he wasn't going to go up. He was thinking of going to 170. Now, ultimately, none of those were serious talks. They were just questions we're asking. Whittaker's going to stay right where he is, but I just think that's an interesting position. I don't know how Sean Strickland should handle it. My thought on it is contrary to what I would generally have. I think Strickland should ignore it. I don't think that those two should fight. I don't think that that behooves all of us. I think it eliminates a top guy. Now, generally in this sport, all we're trying to do is get the top guys versus top guys. I get it. The timing feels off to me. It just feels off to me. And if you agree with me and you think that it's off, well, you're not going to think that and you're not going to agree with me, and we're not going to have the same opinion 1 week from now if Sean Strickland jumps on board and addresses it. Because he's going to address it like only he can, and all of a sudden Whittaker's going to come back, then Sean's going to turn to this whole thing, and a week from now we're going to want to really see the fight. I think it's the wrong direction. But we're talking about it and we're considering it. Speaking about considering, where is Cannonier? There's not a ton of fights that you really want to see for Cannonier. You want to know one that I think you would? You want to know one that I think if you read on the page, go, oh, I want to see that. For Cannonier specifically, right? Like some guys are just harder to match up. Chimaev. I think of all the people that are top guys, you got to put Cannonier with a top guy. We cannot disrespect Jared Cannonier anymore. As much as we've tried to hold that man down, we look silly doing it. Cannonier matters. He is a player at a major level. And much like I'm talking about, we don't want to eliminate a Whittaker Strickland. We don't want to eliminate one of them. We could have a bad cause and effect. There's other guys that are top guys that you'd prefer to narrow out. Cannonier versus Chimaev makes a lot of sense. It works. It sells. They would both do it. They would both want to do it. I'm just bringing that to you. Like 185 pounds, so many times people will dismiss somebody. He's not a star. He doesn't have star potential. And I've heard that about a number of guys. Possibly in my time of following his career, I never heard that more about a specific guy than I heard it about Khabib Nurmagomedov, who went on to be far and away the top draw ever. The most famous and popular Muslim athlete on the planet. That statement might still be true, but I'm just sharing with you. This was a guy they say can't fight for championships and we can't move him to the top because he can't draw because people don't want to see him fight. That same guy who didn't do anything different. Same hat, same interview, same weight class, doing the same thing, became the biggest star ever. I'm just sharing with you. It's an interesting spot. You got to think a little bit. You got to do the matchups. You got to be a little bit creative. But I don't think that any of you will present me a better idea. I don't think any of you have a better idea if you were to matchmake Jared Cannonier than putting him with Chimaev.